So thanks for doing this chat with me, John. John Riccitiello is the CEO of Unity. He's also been the CEO of Electronic Arts. He knows the video game business very well. VR is also his new favorite topic. And I'm Dean Takahashi. I'm the lead writer for GamesBeat at VentureBeat. We do our own conferences. We have ours coming up in May and September of next year. So what's new at Unity?
Oh, what's new with Unity? So, For those of you that don't know, Unity's been around for about 10 years, and we built a product, Unity Engine and Editor. It is what a huge portion of PC or console or mobile games are built on, particularly mobile PC, and then PlayStation Network, Xbox Live, but many other platforms. So basically, we're the tool set that enables the creation of games, and the numbers are pretty big if you try to understand Unity. Last month, for example, 1.2 billion games were downloaded built on Unity. Looking at that, it's probably a network of 300 to 400 million DAUs. Those are very big numbers. And it's a function of the fact that, like on platforms like Android, over 30% of the games are built on Unity. And there's lots of reasons for that. And so all that was, by the way, or at least a lot of that was created long before I got there. So I can't take particular credit in the achievement of sort of that huge democratization, if you will. It was, David Helgeson, Joachim Monte, and the team before me, and the team that's still there. What's new at Unity, and this is, I think, pretty exciting, is this amazing company that's achieved this huge thing in the industry on behalf of developers. So developers can get ahead, they can get to the tools, whether they can afford them or not. We've dialed up the wattage, we've dialed up the ambition, and we're chasing a lot of things right now. Over the last year, we've hired a couple hundred engineers on top of what we've had before, investing to make the most beautiful games possible. You'll hear a lot about VR and AR. The ambitions are enormously high, but we're also investing so that our developer partners can do better on the business side. We've created ads and analytics products that enable them to monetize both the in-app purchases and through advertising, and we're building a discovery platform because I realize, I've been a publisher for a lot of years. It's one thing to build a game, and it's really irritating to build a really great game and can't find an audience for it. And we think the current alternatives out there are just too expensive and too difficult. So we're working at solving the problems that really need to get solved in the industry. So think of Unity as the Unity you've known for a long time, just a lot more ambitious, built on the foundation of cool stuff done by guys that were there before me, and gals that were there before me.
So what's your take on AR and VR?
Well, I'm actually kind of nervous that conferences like this exist at all. And the reason is it seems like we all expect to see a brand new head-mounted display under the Christmas tree, or I guess in America now it's got to be the holiday tree, but whatever it is, it's got to be like this notion that it's all here now. And my honest expectation is we don't have a consumer market for VR and AR probably for 2 years, if not 4. We haven't really got the kit together where it's a powerful enough box, powerful enough compute box. VR and AR require enormous compute power. And frankly, the creative challenges around what a game is, what a movie is, what some of the utility applications are, like just basic chat, they're not figured out. And also content creation in this space is not figured out. So if I had to throw out something, it would be these 2 thoughts. Mm-hmm. Thought number 1, within 10 years and probably within 6 or 7, 1 billion people are going to be wearing a head-mounted display because I think it's the most incredible thing I've ever seen and can imagine. I think it's going to be really big. And I've been through many platform transitions and platform creations, and I see the earmarks of a winner here. Mm-hmm. I'm quite certain of that. The second thing I'm quite certain of is if there's a risk or a threat to this industry, it's that the party might feel like it's over before it gets started. There's a number of folks in the industry that kind of want to say it's not that big a deal. And in 2016, they're probably going to be right. So we're going to go from this gigantic bit of hype, and it's going to come down to here because people are not going to be as excited by what they can get. Either getting the kit together is going to be too expensive, or the content experiences are not going to be as awesome as they like. And that's to be expected. For me, 2016 is sort of the prosumer environment. If you make content for a living and you're used to alpha hardware and alpha software, that's what it's going to feel like. And so, at least for me, I'm a little bit worried that Time Magazine is going to put Palmer back on the cover and say, or something like that. And that's not the truth. It's just the early innings of the biggest game in history. So I just think the early innings are easy to misinterpret.
So you guys get to see everything that's getting created, and people are using Unity to create VR experiences. So from what you see, what do you notice? What are you excited about there?
Well, I was sitting in the back today, and then I was in the little waiting room out there watching the videos. And I've seen so many people prognosticate on what's going to work for games, what's going to work for, chat style or platform applications, what's going to work for movies or linear entertainment. And I tell you what, I've seen thousands of apps. I've got every hardware system you can imagine geared up in my office about 10 blocks from here. So I have access, which is nice, it's fun, it's interesting, and it's great to show my friends. And I'm not going to tell you what I think in terms of what's going to work, in terms of the rules of what's going to work, because I tend to think that most of what I've seen so far isn't going to work. Some of the things are. Like, I don't think you're going to take a current Call of Duty or Battlefield and translate that or port that to VR and expect anything but a bucket full of nausea. I think that we're going to have to reinvent a lot of things. And I've seen really smart companies on the beginning innings of reinvention. And quietly, I'm arrogant enough to think I know what some of the answers are, but I know that I'm going to be wrong at least half the time, and I'm not Nostradamus. What I really believe is it's going to take off a little slow. And all of you that are trying to create new companies, new experiences, you should creatively experiment a lot and don't rush. It's not a consumer market. You're not going to make your money in 2016 on dollars per unit or units per dollar. It's not going to happen that way. It's going to be slow next year. So take your time to build something so cool that it's got a chance of being the beginning of something great when you iterate the second and third time. So the answer to your question, yeah, I think there's going to be linear storytelling, but it's not going to look like a movie because you're probably going to be looking in the wrong place, and great designers are going to need to figure out how to solve that problem. I've seen a few good solutions. Games, I don't think it's going to be the world of Candy Crush, and I don't think it's going to be the world of Battlefield. It's going to be stuff we haven't seen before. And maybe think of Telltale, if you want to get a good example of something that might well work. I've seen a bunch of others. But I would ignore everybody's recipe, all the guys like me that stand up here and pontificate about what's going to work, and screw around with it a lot. Move the camera, move the point of view, move the direction it's coming from, speed it up, slow it down, add content, reduce content, and figure out what feels right. Because the language of VR, the words that we use to describe it, I mean, look, in the movie industry, you think, picture Harrison Ford, right? There's a picture. What are they putting in front of them? A screen. We all know what those words are for games and movies. We don't know what the words are for VR and AR yet, because when you put this up, what about the thing right behind you? What about spatial sound and how that affects things? How do you attract people's attention? How do they know when they've finished something? Because it's not all in front of them. The clues aren't all there. And it's really irritating to have some of the the upfront head-mounted or the screen fronting data, because it interrupts your sense of immersion. We got a lot of work to do to get this right. So
if people are going to have a lot of time, maybe they should create their own 3D game engine.
Oh, there we go. A couple things. So first off, if I had to give people a little bit of advice, I'd start by saying, use a good 3D engine. Because, look, there's probably thousands of man years, but I know there's at least thousands of, many thousands, like on the order of hundreds of thousands of man months built into Unity to make this stuff work in a 3D engine. And I think there's other game engines out there. I can't think of any of them right now, but there's a few others out there. And the point that I want to make is that VR needs a 3D engine. There's a couple things you might want to do in 2D. There's a couple things you might want to do in all sorts of different languages and technical platforms. But the reality is, a 3D engine is in fact native to what VR and AR are in terms of what's around you, in front of you, behind you. And what we're doing is we're changing, stereoscopic 3D and, things in front of you and all around you. That comes natural. And earlier I was suggesting, get creative and iterate. You can spend all the venture money you've raised, you can spend all the money that your $100 billion or $400 billion conglomerate has given you, screwing around with figuring out how to make the paint and paintbrushes when you can pick them up off the desktop and they're available to you right now. Spend your time innovating. I don't think building the tools is as intelligent right now as an idea. It's figuring out what you're going to do with those tools. Mm-hmm. And so, strong bit of advice is, start with a 3D engine and get as much experimentation as you can. Try to create, blue ocean. Try to create something that we haven't seen before. But by the way, chat in VR is blue ocean. Messaging in VR is blue ocean. Tic-tac-toe in VR is blue ocean, and I don't think that's exactly the game design that's going to prevail. But there's a lot of blue ocean out there, and figure out where it is and what's different and what's your take and why it's better in VR. The word that Brendan from Oculus likes to use a lot is presence. What makes you feel like you've gone someplace else? Achieve that. Achieve something special, and the tools will, using tools will save you a year and a half and almost all your, venture funding. Or conglomerate gift. My advice would be to move ahead, do it quickly, iterate a lot.
So, there are other tools out there, Epic with the Unreal Engine, and MaxPlay is a brand new engine. They talked about the need to create, say, a modern cloud-based game engine. Can you talk about how you guys are distinguishing yourselves, Unity, from these other guys?
So, I would start by saying there's a reason why the vast majority of what's been built in VR and AR has been built on Unity already. And look, I'm going to stop everybody here if it's not ready for a somewhat biased perspective. Put your head down and, or get over it. But I have a point of view of it as pro-Unity, but I think it's pro-Unity for a lot of reasons. Where other companies or other platforms can talk about the hundreds of games that have been built on their platform, we can talk about the many thousands of games that have been built on our platform. And it's 160,000 games built on our platform in the last quarter. I don't know what portion of those are VR. They don't always get tagged, but it's many thousands. The second point is there are many thousands of companies that are building their entire company on the basis of Unity. I'm going to explain the reasons in a minute, but it works really, really well to do a lot of things. I was recently visiting, and I think we saw a few minutes ago a young guy up here from Rothenberg Ventures. They're a couple blocks away from my office in San Francisco. They invited me down for the day, and I had the pleasure of meeting, half a dozen, 8 or 9 of the 25 or so companies that they've invested in. And it was interesting is the vast majority were built, entire companies were built on Unity. One was that I didn't see actually was NeoS. It's got this unbelievable content creation layer that sits on top of Unity. Amazingly cool. Mm-hmm. Another company was a VR chat company. I felt like I was in a room talking to somebody for the first time ever. I haven't seen any of the platform guys give me that cool of experience, a company called VR Chat. I saw another in VR, which is sort of a budding YouTube for VR, and then you probably all know AltSpace, but it gives you gives you presence in an environment to do virtually anything with your friends on the internet in VR. And there's many, many more. Now let me explain to you why they're choosing to use Unity. And I think, the first is it's by far the fastest platform to iterate on. You can create something. Look, I'm not, a current technologist. I'm not even sure I ever was. What I can say is I can put something together in an afternoon that looks reasonable. And a team can iterate and create something pretty amazing very quickly. We cover more platforms. Look, I know and appreciate all the major platforms out there. These things don't always turn out the way you expect. And there's at least 50 more hardware platforms coming you haven't heard of yet. And if you include China, probably 5,000. So there is going to be a proliferation of hardware platforms. We're going to get there first. We always do. We're going to get there better. We always do. It turns out to be the secret of where your revenue lies in the years that revenue matter. And maybe for some of you, revenue does matter to get to those platforms. The third, there's 5 million people currently in the world creating content using Unity. They're trained. Who doesn't have a problem building a team? Getting a group of people together that can actually contribute from day one to building your content. So you get this huge, huge, huge workforce, ready, trained, skilled, value-adding. You don't get that elsewhere. And lastly, I'd alluded a little bit to investing in Unity, investing in VR. Today we have 465 engineers making a better 3D engine every day. I don't think anybody in the world's got anything close to that. A huge and increasing proportion of that is focused exclusively on VR, content creation with the head-mounted display in ways you can't even imagine, and also just building higher performance. We're recruiting some of the most talented folks from the most specialized high-end game companies in the world to make Unity stronger and better. So you ask about, how you'd compare to competition. In one regard, there's another company out there that's got a reputation for doing high-end. We're rapidly closing whatever remaining gap that might exist, and we're going to pass that. But beyond that, we're investing more than the others can afford in VR for both the high-end, but then the flexibility and extensibility to get them more platforms. The other end of this thing, you talk about companies that have got this cloud notion. And look, I think collaboration in game building is huge, and using the cloud to collaborate is a big deal. Unity launched its own cloud build platform not long ago, where literally tens of thousands of games have been built on that platform. Now, having said that, we're coming out with our own answer to collaborate. We've got tools already out there and a lot more coming. But the notion that a game is like a Google Doc, I think, is a bad notion. It's basically a one-dimensional idea. You're typing, and you might share the collaborative portion of typing. By the way, I've done Google Docs, and while I think it works, and I think Google Docs are really cool, it always breaks down for me when 3 or 4 people are messing around with a document at the same time. I end up getting lost in the middle of this thing. But what I will say to you is that games and movies and the kinds of things we're talking about are
It sounded like a reference to Max Play, by the way, right?
What's that?
that sounded like a reference to Max Play, I guess, but...
It might be.
Yeah, okay.
What do you think? Is it?
Yeah.
And my point, I try not to be too pointy in these things, but look, I think that in an art-centered world, I don't know that 10 people with paintbrushes on the same canvas at the same time permanently through a project is frankly the idea that I would push. Unity's built on the notion that you might want 5 people putting up art or 5 people working on one thing for a period of time, and you can be brought into that and then excluded from that. It's the tool that I think professionals need to use because they recognize sometimes they're working alone in a team and sometimes they're working collaborative in a team. But I don't know that the notion of always sharing everything with everyone's a particularly good one. But I'm sure they'll adjust and come to the best ideas for them.
So you mentioned business models earlier. I mean, do you have an idea of what business model is going to work the best in VR? The banner ad doesn't seem like it's going to be the way to monetize.
So from the beginning of time, all content has been generally monetized one of 2 ways. People pay for it directly, in-app purchases or premium, or other ways of paying directly, subscription, for example. And secondly, they pay, through advertising. In other words, their presence there creates enough of an audience, and that allows for an ad model. I don't see enough hardware units and enough usage for an ad model to generate enough revenue in VR or AR for 4 to 5 years. So that leaves you singularly, for those of you that want enough revenue to pay the rent, having to deal with premium. So, personally, I think the notion of presence, this idea that you're immersed in a space, makes it a little harder to imagine the henpecked notion of in-app purchases being the way to make that go. And also, in-app purchases work in a world where 95, 97% of the people don't pay, but you live with such a mass market that the 3% can float the boat for enough companies, or at least some companies at the very top of the pyramid. Earlier, I'd said that we're not going to see mass market adoption in 2016 and 17. So by process of elimination, I sort of say ads will work someday, but not in the next couple of years at scale for anybody to pay the bills. In-app purchases aren't going to have a large enough audience to pay the bills. And that leaves you kind of where console was in the early 90s. And I bet the business models follow suit.
So there's something like 250 VR companies already people are talking about seed funds for VR as well getting started, and so we know there's going to be lots more. Even by the time the first unit starts shipping. What do you think sort of the outcome of this is going to be? Like, how do you see us evolving?
So look, I earlier mentioned that 2016 and 17 have the risk of more disappointment than excitement. Mm-hmm. And we may well see so much hardware and hardware choice out there, and a lot of it will be crap. And I think we're going to see a lot of software and software choice, and a lot of that will be similarly flavored. And I think there's a risk of some disappointment. But having said that, I have complete conviction that some of the people in this audience and others are going to create the special experiences that matter. And they're likely to be pretty straightforward things, at least initially. Chat apps, travel, basic games, basic linear storytelling, some utilities for content creation on top of platforms like Unity. By the way, and we are building our own to augment that world so it'll work better, so you can create within, if you will, the head-mounted display. But I do think that you're going to need a little bit of fortitude to get through 2016 with the same confidence that we can come in blindly now without so much in the marketplace at the end of 2015. Mm-hmm. And you're going to want to look for the gold nuggets and get excited about those. But again, I want to triple emphasize, I am about as big an enthusiast as you can be for VR and also for AR. I was an early participant in helping Brendan with Oculus, and I'm close to all the major platforms today. This is the future. It is a very big deal. It's just getting shot out of the cannon in a ready, fire, aim sort of way, as opposed to ready, aim, fire sort of way. Mm-hmm. And because of that, I think there's going to be some fodder for less than favorable reviews of some things that are going to be in the market. And I think that's going to be a competing notion in 2016 mm-hmm. with those of us that have got all the enthusiasm in the world.
So do we have a question in the audience? Down here.
Hi. I hear a lot of talk about B2C business right now, and obviously there won't be customers for a while. And a lot of people are talking about B2B business right now. Can you talk a little bit about B2D, so actually business for developers? Unity is in a really great spot where you can actually sell tools and assets on the asset store. It's been a real help, and I feel like in the short term there's a lot of opportunity for companies out there to build VR tools to help get everything ready in the short term.
Well, I mean, if after this, look, I think B2C, first up in gaming, B2C is 95% of the industry. So let's be, ish. I don't have the exact number. But it's certainly more than 90, and it's obviously not 100, because we exist, and there are competitors out there for us and a few other things that are on the B2B side. And VR is going to be the same way. So let's be realistic. You have to build a consumer app for this to be cool. On the B2B side, I would say, for those of you who think of that, because it's earlier in the cycle, you have to build it before you can deploy it. Let me remind you of the standard business model for B2B in an industry where you sell to movie companies and game companies. It's free. So you got to build it. It's like one of those things, you got to build it for the long term and build your business. So I don't think B2B represents a business answer panacea for people that want to get up early. But there is no question that there's going to be some B2B tools, like, realistically, people are going to need to communicate with each other in VR in a multiplayer environment, and there'll be some level of chat or interaction that's important to people, and they're going to want that. And every game company and movie company isn't going to build it. There's all sorts of people working on things like spatial sound and how to attract your attention using, doing that better one way versus another. And those are pretty complicated technologies to master. Now, there's a good system within Unity, but will there be more advanced systems, either in Unity or someplace else, that could plug into Unity, and could you create a business out of that? Sure.
So we got time for one
there's
really
lots of stuff.
Quick question.
Okay, sorry about that.
One more really quick one. Okay.
Hi. Quick question. You mentioned that the model that Telltale uses for storytelling could work in a virtual reality environment. So could you develop on that? Because they do take into account interactive models in order to tell stories, but VR presents new challenges. So what do you think could work in order to tell stories in VR?
Look, I didn't want to go down that path, but I'll at least explain why I picked on Telltale. And full disclosure, I'm on their board, but that's not why I mentioned them. The reason I mentioned them is locomotion in a Telltale game. If you look at, like one in particular I thought was brilliant was the season 2 for Walking Dead. You're moving through a space in a measured way. You're not rushing through a space. So some of the issues around speed of locomotion and comfort really don't come up. The second issue is, I personally believe you're going to need some bit of interaction to tell a linear story, because you're going to need to draw the user or player's attention to something to know that they've actually got the point you're trying to make before they move to the next thing. A film director has the chance of putting everything right in front of you and assuming you haven't gone to the bathroom or gone off to make popcorn without hitting the pause button. They kind of know that you're paying attention. It's very possible for something very salient to a storyline's progression to be taking place over here when you're looking over there and you completely miss it. There's other solutions to this problem. I'm not saying that Telltale's way of storytelling is the only way to do it. I just think it's a particularly good model for one way to go about it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dean.